just learned by Lenka. Now we can. Good morning to everybody. I hope you feel well. And I hope you had a nice evening yesterday at Prague. My name is Armin Grunwald. I'm director of the ITAS Institute at Karlsruhe and director also of the Office of Technology Assessment at the German Parliament. And it's a pleasure for me now to be able to open this second day of the PACITA conference. There has been a change in the program. Naomi Oreskes could not come. She had to cancel the visit because of personal reasons on a very short notice. And I'm very happy that we found a highly competent person to take over the role as a plenary speaker. Stefan Boeschen is here with us. He is an engineer. But if you will listen to him the next 40 minutes, you will not be able to imagine that he was educated as an engineer. He changed to sociology, and he did a lot of work in the context of sociology of science, sociology of knowledge, sociology of non-knowledge, of risk, and all of these very difficult issues we have to deal with in technology assessment. His speech today in the morning, in a sense, is a prolongation, or let me say an in-depth consideration of some aspects we heard yesterday from Wiebe Beiker. It's on democracy and the relation between democracy and expertise. It is, I guess, at the heart of what TA does, and so I'm very happy now to be able to listen to you, Stefan. Please take the floor.
Yes, I mean, thank you very much for this kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a really great honor to me to give this presentation and to present some first ideas to a field of growing importance to our community, the field of meta expertise. Participation and contextualization seem to be the magic formula to solve conflicts over chances and risks of alienation and to guarantee precaution and control. Heterogeneity offers plenty of benefits. New forms of knowledge, new forms of governance should allow us to take a step forward towards a democratic control of technological progress. Contrary to the old paradigm of solving these conflicts, bundled as technology of hubris, as Sheila Jasanoff mentioned, proposed to establish technologies of humility. In this sense, I assume that most of the speakers present here might be believers in the importance of and the need for such technologies of humility. And I agree that these ideas are important and valuable. It is true. These ideas are part of our belief system as community of TA. Yet, I have the strong impression that there are some important questions that need to be raised. My starting point. Why are these plausible demands so difficult to realize? And what aspects do we have to take into consideration? The way from abstract benefits of heterogeneity to concrete and useful strategies is paved with difficult questions. How to map the different forms of expertise, how to combine the different forms of expertise, how to decide which expertise to follow. Moreover, there are two aspects to consider. Firstly, the ideas of the technologies of hubris are continuing to influence and to dominate the public debate by labels such as sound science or an evidence-based approach, which are in some cases used to stabilize technocratic thinking and institutionalization. Secondly, studies on agnotological strategies, like the famous book by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway about merchants of doubts, or Robert Proctor in his famous book Golden Holocaust, have provided some challenging insights about the strategic use of non-knowledge. By the examples of the tobacco industry and the climate change problem, it could be shown how economic actors are spearheading endeavors to minimize non-knowledge, surprisingly, but with the underlying goal to repulse regulation efforts. And these sets of strategies are really difficult to disentangle. Against this background, the fundamental question has to be addressed. How to come to a relatively uncontested expertise by structuring consensus and dissent of different offices of expertise, and thus create strong incentives for actions and unfold regulatory potential. Although, quote, facts are uncertain, values in dispute, stakes high and decision urgent, unquote, as Ravitz mentioned in his famous statement. This presentation tries to answer the outlined question by emphasizing the thesis that the opening of the black box of scientific expertise building will only be successful if our knowledge about expertise is enhanced and new forms of meta-expertise are created. Meta-expertise has to be seen as a link between epistemic and cultural values. It therefore allows a political debate about the problem-centered evaluation of different offices of expertise. My reference to the topos of meta-expertise relates to the inspiring book of Harry Collins and Robert Evans about rethinking expertise. Collins and Evans constructed a, quote, periodic table of expertises, unquote, to classify all different sources of expertise, including the different forms of tacit knowledge and meta-reflections. Their approach is a holistic one, but with respect to problems of decision-making, I would like to start with a more modest attempt. A well-chosen starting point should allow us to reconstruct not only the connection between cultural and epistemic values, but also the empirical links to the problems under debate. Therefore, I would like to propose that meta-expertise should start with the differentiation between three dimensions: criteria, indicators, and observables, and their linkages. The philosopher of science Christoph Hubig proposed this scheme, and I suggest using it as a heuristic for thinking about meta-expertise. Meta-expertise should thus allow a critical assessment of different offices of expertise and the social configuration under which they are processed. You see, my presentation will focus on the epistemological aspects of my question, but we always have to keep in mind that the development of democratic culture depends on the creation of institutions that enable participation and contextualization to be socially effective and legitimate. The effectiveness of meta-expertise depends on its institutional embedding. Without institutionalization, there is no development of democratic culture. So, you see my outline is structured as follows. As a first step, I would like to introduce the conceptual framework with reference to the concept of civic epistemologies, which was mainly brought into the debate by Sheila Jasanoff and Clark Miller. Presenting an observation that struck me, a form of knowledge politics by implementing the IPBES process in Busan 2010, I combine the thoughts about civic epistemologies with the aspects of meta-expertise mentioned before: criteria, indicators, observables. As a second step, I focus on another case study, namely the debate about and the implementation of the new regulation of chemicals within the EU, REACH, registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals, in 2007. As a third step, I reconstruct the problems of implementing the precautionary principle with respect to the scheme of the three knowledge elements for meta-expertise. You know them now: criteria, indicators, and observables. As a fourth step, I present some ideas to generalize these insights. And as the fifth and final step, I will draw some conclusions by reformulating these insights into challenges for technology assessment. I will start with some conceptual considerations. My argumentation is based on the concept of civic epistemologies, mainly proposed by Sheila Jasanoff and Clark Miller. They define this concept in a quite similar way, but with interesting differences in priorities. The two definitions read as follows. Sheila Jesinoff wrote in her valuable book, Designs on Nature, Civic Epistemology, quote, refers to the institutionalized practices by which members of a given society test and deploy knowledge claims as used as a basis for making collective choices, unquote. In this definition, the focus is on the institutional aspects for processing knowledge. Clark Miller emphasizes another aspect. Civic epistemologies are, quote, practices, methods, and institutional processes by which the community identifies new policy issues, generates knowledge relevant to their resolution, and puts that knowledge to use in making decisions, unquote. Here, the openness of the situation with respect to practices is addressed considerably. The social, cognitive, and temporal dynamics in civic epistemologies allow processes of opening black boxes. Thus, the heterogeneity resulting from different knowledge resources can be ordered, and institutional environments for processing different forms of expertise can be created. Exemplified by the case of IPBES. IPBES is the acronym for Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. We can observe the beginnings of the forming and establishing of a civic epistemology on global scale. As there is a lot going on there, I would like to illustrate my argument with a short excerpt of the IPBES Boeschen meeting held in June 2010. One excerpt is taken from the opening speech, the other from the so-called Boeschen outcomes. We start with the opening speech, held by Achim Steiner from UNEP. Which knowledge is needed? To enhance, quote, to enhance developmental and economic life is only possible through sound, solid, and uncontested science. Remember, uncontested science, that's a bit surprising. Science that revels in the different approaches, encompasses all available knowledge bases, including traditional knowledge, and brings in the best available data from all corners of the planet in order to reach meaningful and actionable conclusions. Let us analyze. What are the different social and epistemic demands articulated in this speech? Concerning the social demands, Steiner mentions two aspects regarding the quality of science itself, namely a sound and solid science. Moreover, the knowledge produced by science has to hold the quality of usability, which is expected to be higher the lower the conflict rate is. Therefore, it has to be uncontested science. And finally, science has to allow meaningful and actionable conclusions. But there are also epistemic demands. Science has to revel in different approaches. This confronts science with the inherent heterogeneity of its disciplines. But moreover, the knowledge has to have a transdisciplinary basis because Steiner states that it has to encompass all available knowledge bases, also the extra-scientific ones. Finally, it has to bring in the best available data, no matter where created and no matter by whom produced. That is quite challenging. But what are the findings, the outcomes? In the final document, which knowledge is needed now? Quote, the new platform should perform regular and timely assessments of knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem services and their interlinkages, which should include comprehensive global, regional, and as necessary, sub-regional assessment and thematic issues at appropriate scales and new topics identified by science and as decided upon by the plenary. These assessments must be, that's the important point, scientifically credible, independent, and peer-reviewed, and must identify uncertainties. There should be a clear, transparent process of sharing and incorporating relevant data. Emphasis by me. What solution was found? Not surprisingly, science is to govern the assessment process. Science has to frame the assessment by identifying new topics. The scientific procedures to guarantee the quality of methodic examination of knowledge are highlighted, namely peer review processes and the institutionalized independence of science. I think there is indeed no alternative to the established social forms of constructing scientific credibility, but what are the effects? Mainly, the place of other forms of knowledge, such as local knowledge, remains unclear. What is the systematic place for local knowledge in this process? For example, and with respect to the importance of local biodiversity knowledge, what about shamans of the rainforest? What are the peer review procedures for them? Systematically speaking, there is a lack of symmetry between scientific and local knowledge. But how to resolve this tension, or more accurately, how to proceed with this tension? Against this background, I will introduce the heuristic for building up meta expertise, namely the reflection on criteria, indicators, observables. These three qualifiers for knowledge can be defined as follows. Criteria. Criteria evaluate indicators against the background of main cultural values or interests, namely economic interests or the precautionary principle, like that. Indicators, representing an effect-related aspects of a problem which should be considered or solved. An indicator is like the CO2 concentration, or that's observable. Indicator is like toxicity, or like ecotoxicity, or like these. More general, representing an effect-related aspect of a problem. Observable, applying indicators by providing specified methods or for empirical observation or test strategies. These three aspects are to be taken in mind. Why should we proceed that way? This scheme, to my impression, allows clarifying to which layers the different arguments or empirical evidences are related to. Therefore, it enables us to classify any sort of knowledge with respect to the description of a problem. This can be tested on a specific and well-established debate, the regulation of chemicals. Let us now come to a case in which a civic epistemology was formed since a long time, and yet a reorientation took place the last years. What happened? The regulation of chemical is an important issue since the beginnings of a science-based industry. Thus, this civic epistemology is well established with its specific networks and cooperation structures, so that changes are unlikely and difficult to realize. Astonishingly, there has been a change at the very beginning of the 21st century. After 10 years of a public political debating, the new regulation of chemicals reached registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals was established in 2007. There are many aspects worth mentioning, but with regard to my argument of the necessity of meta-expertise, I would highlight only a specifically relevant chapters of the whole story. All these chapters are connected to the question about the knowledge basis for decision-making and their transformation. The generalization of the precautionary principle made the question of low doses, high stakes, which is also the title of a report of the European Environment Agency in the late 1990s, an important stimulus for the debate on the reordering of regulation. One aspect emphasized was that regulators came to realize that the full test strategy had reached an impasse. Against this background, there was not only a need for an acceleration of the production of risk knowledge, less knowledge, better decisions, but also for the introduction of new indicators to support the criterion of precaution. Coming to the first point, the limitation of the full test strategy, This graph unveils the tragedy of the full test strategy, starting with 100,000, here it is, 100,000 chemicals, industrial chemicals in 1981, only 10 assessments reports, 10 from 100,000 reports were completed in 1997. This point here. Sven Hansen and Christina Ruden stated accordingly that the full test strategy would need about 5,000 years to cover all chemicals registered. Speaking on behalf of science and research, that sounds quite fantastic, but with respect to regulation, this spells catastrophe. One important objective was therefore to minimize the resources necessary for obtaining the information stipulated by the legislation. Against this background, the white paper, which was presented in 2001, bundled the main objectives for the new legislation: time limits for the discharge of hazardous substances, producers' responsibility, guidelines for the application of the precautionary principle, PBT in analogy to CMR substances, I will explain it later on. Costs of risk assessment should be financed by the industry. The paradigm shift is hidden in the abstract formula PBT equals CMR. What does this mean? PBT represents the indicators persistency, bioaccumulation potential, and toxicity. CMR represents the indicators carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, and reproductive toxicity. What does this equation PBT equals CMR mean? A paradigm shift. This can be understood looking at the following graph. Here we can see the emergence of the precautionary principle in the field. As shown in the graph, there are different levels to be addressed in risk consideration. The first level, hazard potential, concerns the emission of a substance, whether as a product itself or as an unwanted byproduct. The second level, hazard, is that of exposure. Humans or specific species get exposed to a single substance or a mix of substances and might be harmed. The third level damage is the one of an actual damage which with observable effects caused by a certain chemicals. The strategy of the pre-REACH era aimed to map all damages to be associated with a certain chemical and decide whether this chemical is harmful or not. That's the full test strategy. But the insight grew that chemical risk in particular can neither be exhaustively described nor predicted, and that it therefore makes no sense to base regulation exclusively on manifest environmental damage or well-known effects on human health alone. Instead, it is necessary to look for strategies that take varying degrees of empirical evidence into account. Against this background and with respect to precaution measures, the set of indicators used to describe risk situations has been enlarged. Moreover, there was a shift in focus from the level of damage to the level of hazard. This must be seen as a revolution. For a long time, the evidence of a real danger had to have been proven to allow regulation. Nowadays, regulation is possible when possible harm is indicated. PBT indicators are hazard indicators, whereas CMR indicators are damage indicators. That's the important difference. This paradigm shift was accompanied by institutional innovations. What kind of innovations concerning the institutional procedure took place? There are two main aspects. The first one is the establishment of a new administration unit, the European Chemical Agency, ECHA, in Helsinki, and the associated restructuring of the division of work between industry and administration. The second one is the design of a new system of risk knowledge production and sharing. With respect to the first aspect, the division of work between industry and administration, the main innovation consists in the shift of responsibility for data production from administration to industry. The industry is now responsible to fulfill the data requirements, whereas the newly founded ASCR is responsible to control whether the data requirements are fully met. With respect to the second aspect, a chain of risk knowledge production had been established. This new system is connected with two innovations. Firstly, along the manufacturing chain from producers to downstream users, a platform for sharing knowledge and generating risk knowledge has been implemented. Thus, the upstream producers, the chemical plants, for example, share their knowledge with the downstream users. But the users as well can collect knowledge from the contextualization of specific chemicals and communicate their insights back to the producers. Secondly, this system was combined with a standardization of thresholds of risk knowledge. The registration of a substance depends on the fulfillment of specific data requirements. The slogan was "No data, no market." Because there are a vast number of complex problems connected with the production and sharing of knowledge, the so-called REACH implementation projects were set up. These projects serve to identify the best available tools for testing chemicals and combine data from different sources to draw a coherent picture. Yes, this system seems to be perfect. Are there any limitations? As you most likely have foreseen, there are some very important limitations which are worth to be reflected upon in more detail. One touchstone is located at the level of specific criteria, indicators, and observables. Another one at the level of the social organization of the collection of risk-relevant knowledge at the European Chemical Agency. As mentioned before in my description of the conceptual framework, the differentiation of three dimensions seems to be a useful tool to analyze processes of building up knowledge for decision making. Let us repeat the definition of the three qualifiers for knowledge. Criteria allows to evaluate indicators against the background of main cultural values or interests. Indicators represent an effect-related aspect of problem which should be considered or solved. Observables allow applying indicators by providing specified method for empirical observations or elaborated test strategies. Against this background, the main question whether the transformation of the civic epistemology in the field of chemical policy induced by REACH was a success or not can be answered as follows. Some important innovations had been made. New criteria, such as the precautionary principle or the wish for a unified system solution, evolved and structured the knowledge-building process. To support these criteria, specific indicators were highlighted with respect to these criteria. These are persistence, bioaccumulation potential, and to some extent the spatial range of chemicals. But yet, the question concerning the observables in the REACH process remains unanswered. Succeeded the guiding principle of the new legislation, no data, no market? Let us have a fresh look what's going on inside the black box. What about the observables in the REACH process? To answer this question, I will analyze 4 levels. The institutional level of legislation. What is the fixed setting of observables in the law itself? Are the observables defined there supporting the PPT analysis? The second level, the practical level of the existence of PPT-related data. Are there enough data produced? The third level is the one of communication between industry and administration. What about the data placed at the disposal of the administration by the industry. Are they well elaborated? Are they sufficient? The fourth level is the level of administration. In which ways does ECHA organize the database and come to conclusive assessments? 10, 5? Oh, that's great. The short message, oh, there's a mistake. So the slide 21 that's a problem. That's the one, it's the first level of the institutional level. What is the fixed setting of observables in the legislation itself? You have to have a look at the annex of this legislation, and there you found that only at a production level, round about 100 tons and more, the PBT criteria are really addressed. So, and you have to keep in mind that it's only 10% of all substances produced. So there is really a lack of knowledge institutionalized in the new legislation. That's a really problem. So let us come to the second level, the availability of PBT data. Although not required by the law, the data for PBT analysis could be probably available by other means. This is not the case. As you can see in the picture, only for 2,663 chemicals, data relating to one of the indicators exist, and only 91 chemicals underwent observations with respect to all three indicators. That has to be seen in the light of 95,000 chemicals used in industry, excuse me. So, you see, here's also a missing link. What about the last both aspects, the fulfillment of data requirements by the industry and the workflow of ECHA? Data requirements to be fulfilled by the industry. With the new legislation, ECHA has to rely on the industry. Thus raises new problems of control, as shown in the progress report by ECHA in 2011. Jukka Malm, Director of Regulatory Affairs at ECHA, stated, quote, "Industry has not taken full responsibility for the quality of data," unquote. More precisely, the report says, quote, "The quality of many of the chemical safety assessment is of concern," unquote. In particular, it notes that the quality of the scientific arguments put forward by the industry to justify using Red Cross and to waive additional safety tests is, quote, "not high enough," unquote. And Sebastian Hoffmann, a toxicologist based in Cologne, Germany, who works as an industry consultant on REACH, says that companies seem to have been, quote, "creative," unquote, in interpreting REACH demands for them to fill data gaps. There's plenty of room for improvement. What about the working routines of ECHA? One important trend can be noticed, namely the strategy to abandon extensive standard testing procedures in favor of an approach tailored to specific substances. This strategy is supported by various arguments. On the one hand, substances can be characterized by their specific properties, and on the other hand, the available data had been limited and highly variable. However, no procedures have been created to combine heterogeneous knowledge resources, nor is it clear how to ensure the comparability of results achieved with different methods. Therefore, the following question remains answered yes: which kind of expertise allows to sort the different assessments? The first comes to some conclusion about the case. The first conclusion is as clear as it is frustrating. Although innovations with respect to new criteria and related indicators took place, the required observables were not configured in an appropriate way. Keywords: inadequate data requirements, failure in test strategies, problems in handling of observables. The second conclusion serves as an explanation. Although there was an agreement about the set of indicators, the strategy failed. Why was this the case here? The structure of the situation was determined by the overarching goal of precaution. Therefore, the set of indicators was restructured in the new law. But with respect to the persisting conflict between industry-based criteria and precaution, the conflict was shifted down to the level of observables and thus turned down. The outcome is dramatic. Officially, the European Union follows a politics of precaution, but unofficially, the EU is unable to enforce it. So, with respect to the time, I come to my conclusions. Here they are. Meta expertise can build up by using the mentioned qualifiers for knowledge, criteria, indicators, and observables. This set is useful to describe the different knowledge perspectives. And it is also useful to reconstruct the politics of indicators pursued by the different actors. Meta expertise can uncover selective positivism of each collective actor involved while highlighting the relevant aspects under debate. The mentioned meta-expertise connects values to empirical insights and allows a political debate about which dangers are to be averted and which innovations are to be aspired. In this sense, such a form of expertise is an important building block in the further development of democratic culture by allowing a political debate about knowledge for decision making. And technology assessment has some important tasks to cover. TA can help to build up the mentioned form of meta-expertise. TA can make transparent the linkages between indicators and their criteria and indicators and observables. This is necessary to allow a political debate about the problem to be addressed and to avoid technocracy. And finally, TA can make suggestions whether to follow, the strategy 1, that was on the slide skipped, enhancing transdisciplinary co-observation, or strategies 2, enhancing civic epistemology, or both together. Finally, technology assessment understood in this way can work as an honest broker in the sense of Roger Pielke. Let me finish by my presentation with a quotation from his important book, quote, "Honest brokers of policy alternatives would not simply seek to better communicate the results of science to the policymaker or to advocate a single best course of action, but to develop the capability to place science into policy context and to fulfill the obligation to provide independent guidance on the significance of science for a wide scope of policy alternatives." Unquote. Thank you very much for your attention.
Stefan, thanks for opening up the box. You had the chance and you took it to present us an in-depth analysis of this very difficult situation in regulating chemicals, and it was very impressive already to see the numbers you presented us and then to see what strategies are available to improve the situation. Thanks also for relating your thoughts with TA issues, and I think we have a lot to do in order to prepare ourselves better to be able to cope with those challenges which we are facing in more and more areas of our work. Unfortunately, there is no occasion now for a discussion because of time restrictions, but please do not let Stefan go home without having him confronted with your perspectives on what he has said. So there is, I guess, there are a lot of occasions today and tomorrow to to approach Stefan and to come into a discussion about these very important issues of developing TA and practicing TA. Okay, that's time now for coffee, but there's an announcement. It's yours? No? Lenka, you wanted to make an announcement.
Yeah, just hello. Just organizational stuff again. We have the two sessions now that are in the next building here in the area, and that's why you will most probably not find it yourself, and that's why you will meet before 10 at the exit, which is called NTK2. So there you will meet for privacy in the internet world and for the social media after the coffee break. Okay. So, and if you have questions for Stefan, you can also put them on the Twitter.
Twitter is good for everything. So enjoy your coffee break.